meeting for August. Start with review and approval of June meeting minutes. If there are any comments from any of the SWAC membership on minutes. No comments, corrections. Have a motion to accept.
Move to accept.
Mike Riley motions to accept. Do we have a second?
Second.
Erwin Swetnam seconded, so meeting minutes are accepted as published. Item number 2 is public comment. If we have any members of the public that would like to weigh in on things, this is your opportunity.
Chad, can we go back and have a vote on the minutes?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm not too keen on Robert's rule. All those in favor of accepting the meeting minutes as published? Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? All right, they are accepted. Thank you, Sue. Is there a chat here? Let's see, we have a note from Keith Caceres.
Yes.
Okay, Keith, I just seen the chat note you had here. So
Oh, yes, thanks.
out of here by 9. So, okay. So anyway, do we have any members of the public that would want to share anything with us at this time? Okay, we'll move on. Move on to item number 3, a criteria update. So at the June SWAC meeting, we did a final review on the citing criteria. And the last step in that process was to bring it to the board at a July board meeting for their consideration. There was one comment from Commissioner Chang to make a slight adjustment on one of the criteria, and it escapes me which it was, Dwight.
It was the distance to the hall.
Oh, to the
distance from the waste.
From the hall,
essentially, yeah.
yeah. So we made an adjustment in the percent weighing for that. And at the July commissioners meeting, they did accept the criteria with that adjustment. Also in July, we elected to not hold the SWAC meeting because we were waiting on the board's approval of the citing criteria before parametrics and their team rolled up their sleeves and started working on the actual process here. So this meeting, we have some information to share with the advisory committee regarding application of the restricted areas where we cannot cite a landfill fatal fall criteria. So with that, I'm going to pass this over to Dwight for the presentation on that.
So since you're probably better at Zoom than I am, I'm going to let you do the start the sharing. And I'll take it from there.
Let's see here. So who's keen on this?
So the share screen down below, I'm pretty sure you did.
And we want to go here. Share.
Yeah, somebody.
Okay, so everyone can see the slideshow? Yeah, we have my minimize. Okay, so with that, cool.
Okay, so I'm Dwight Miller, Parametrics. Good to see you again. I think the last time I was here was in May at a SWAC meeting. And we went through quite a bit at that time about the criteria and then, what next we were going to do with the criteria, which was, well, first take it to the board and then have them take a look at it. As Chad noted, it had some tweaks to it. We did those. And just to kind of follow up on that, the comments on distance to the waste centroid was really based upon long-term costs for a facility. Because the farther you have to haul, the more cost that is. And so over time, that could be pretty significant. So we tweaked the weighting somewhat and the scoring on that to account for that. And that was really the only significant change we had coming out of the board. So with that and the approval of the criteria, we moved forward with a kind of a countywide screening of the of things. So what you see here, you've seen this slide before. It kind of our progression slide. So where we're at is the non-specific conceptual design, and then the site selection criteria development. We've done that. We're doing the data collection, so we've done most of that, although that's always a work in progress because we find more data and the interpretation of that data, particularly with Ryan and I worked on this just yesterday. An issue came up with airports, and distance from airports is one of the criteria. And so the important point on that was that is it a public access airport, or is it a private limited access airport? Private limited access airports are not don't necessarily fall into that. So at this point, we didn't want to include those as a fatal flaw, but it will be something that we.
I just touched base with Nick.
Hey,
And got confirmation.
Peter Glotowski, can you mute your microphone? Thank you. Sorry. And so the point was that we didn't want to bring those forward as fatal flaw, but we will look at those site specific if it is an issue on those. But at this point, we want to make sure we don't, knock something out kind of arbitrarily that really should be held in there until we go to the site specific evaluation. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. And then that will lead into the broad area screening that's kind of noted, I think, next. Got my own computer here too, so go right in there. And so what we're going through today is the countywide exclusionary area. And you'll see that this kind of builds on itself. And so at the end of this, we will have essentially showing a map that shows those areas that are excluded from site development. Not that there couldn't be other areas that are excluded, but those need to be evaluated more at the site specific level, at the parcel level, so to speak. And you can't necessarily do it at a broad screening. This broad screening we're doing using GIS. Using a lot of the resources that the county has in their GIS system, as well as what we've gained from other public agencies, state agencies, the county, as well as some federal resources as well, especially for wildlife issues. And so as I note here, we have this countywide, which we're going to present today, and then there's also the site-specific fatal flaw criteria. And those are applied at the site identification and broad screening level. So those are kind of looked at in the next round. And what's particularly important about that is this next step we're going to go through. So between now and the September meeting is the actual site identification process. And so this is working with the county GIS and looking at the parcel level and identifying parcels that meet, the size considerations that then also fit within these non-exclusionary areas. So, we have the exclusionary areas, and so what we're really trying to look at is what areas are not excluded. And so that's the next step that we will be going through in the next month or so. And then that is what, based upon that list of sites, we will take into the broad site screening, which kind of gets into that scoring of sites in that next round, which we will be doing through the fall. So I kind of wanted to note some of these areas that are really at the parcel level review that are noted up here. So like the groundwater wells and protection areas, you start applying some of these criteria, like at the state level, groundwater protection area, let's say. Well, pretty much all of Deschutes County is a groundwater protection area. The thing is that that's not really what our criteria states. It's more, protection of an actual groundwater resource and groundwater resources being used. And so, it's important to look at that more at the parcel level. High value farmland, the same thing. We can, the EFU zoning is one area where landfills are outright noted that they can be in, except for high value farmland.
And the high value of farmland really needs to be identified at that parcel level. And then just regular zoning, the wildlife zoning overlays and how those are applied. Most of those are actually not fatal flaw because there's mitigation that can be done. And then cultural resources is a potential fatal flaw, but you have to be at the parcel level for that. And because of the sensitivity of those resources, that will not be publicly communicated. It's really important to keep those resources confidential, so to speak. And that we do a lot of review of sites for other purposes as well. And that's typically the approach we take. The State Historical Preservation Office, SHPO, requires that you not release the actual information on those sites. We will just say that is not allowed in that location.
So you won't be able to avoid people knowing that this parcel, this 500-acre parcel, has some cultural resources on it.
That's correct, although we can fairly, we can just say that 500-acre parcel is not available. Or we can, and this is another important point, and I'm glad you brought that up, Tim, is that we can end up with sites that there might be a quote unquote fatal flaw criteria for that parcel, but it's like on 50 acres of that 500-acre parcel. And we don't want to throw out that entire 500 acres if in fact, it just has steep slopes on a small piece of it, or it has a small historic, feature that's off in the corner or something like that. And so
Really impact it.
exactly, and we can adequately buffer those on that parcel. And so that is why it really is critical to look at some of these things at that parcel level. Because even wells, I mean, in some cases, we could readily have, the necessary buffers if it's a large enough parcel. And the other thing with wells is that we talk about water supply wells and proximity to water supply wells. Well, if you're buying a parcel, for instance, or it's a county parcel already and it has a well on it, you can decommission that well. I mean, that is allowed. And so we don't want to necessarily throw out that parcel. So all of that said, these are the items that we've mapped for this process. And so this is the order in which we will kind of build this map, and it'll be kind of the next piece here coming up. But it's kind of the urban question. So it's city limits, the urban brook boundary, unincorporated communities, and the urban reserve area. So identifying those as all non or exclusionary. The airport buffers, those airports that are public access, public airports. Most significant ones are obviously Redmond, Bend, and then also out in Sisters, and there's a couple others as well in the county. Wetlands, fairly small areas of wetlands here and there that are identified at this level. So this is the National Wetland Inventory, which is a pretty high level review of wetlands. And so once we get to the site level, we will actually look at that more specifically. The FEMA 100-year floodplain, those are actually fairly good. I mean, as far as what's identified out there, once you get to a site, if you're close to a 100-year floodplain, there may be a need to do further modeling of that, just to ensure that, given new climatic conditions, that you're showing a large enough area for that floodplain, because there's a lot of new modeling that's showing some of these floodplains are bigger than they were in the past. Sage grouse core habitat area, the Metolius river area, Holocene fault buffer. So Holocene faults being those that have been seen in the last about 8,000 years, seen activity, and then steep slopes.
on the sage grouse.
Mhm.
As I understand it, there's like 3 levels of potential impact.
Yep.
Exclusionary zone is just the highest level, or is it,
It is just the highest level.
so where there's Lex, where there's,
It identified, yep, and as well as high value habitat. I think is the other way that's defined. And so the county has done a really good job of identifying those areas, so we're following that, those areas that have been identified by the county. Yeah. So let's see how we do this. I use this now. Yeah, there we go. So what do you want to do? So I need to go to. There we go. Okay. So here's the map of the county, kind of knocked off the corner there just a little bit. Let's try to get it. That worked pretty good. Correct. Cool. So all that's identified on this right now is actually a couple of things. The green are Forest Service lands. We actually don't show separately BLM lands on this. And that's not to say that those are exclusionary, it's just that that's kind of the background mapping. The pink and red dots, those are solid waste facilities. And so the big one.
Can you show the map, please, and share it?
Oh, this is not sure.
Okay.
No,
sorry
always-
about that.
PowerPoint.
Dwight, you might need to unshare.
Yeah, I think we have to.
Yeah, okay, there we go.
If you do the screen, you can flip between these.
Yeah.
Do you see it now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Do you see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, great. And so back to the dots. So this is not landfill where we are right now, close to where we are right now. And then the other transfer stations around the county. And so this is just to kind of get a feel for where the current facilities are, roughly, where they fall within the areas we're going to identify through this process. So we'll plug these all in. So city limits, urban growth boundary, unincorporated communities, and urban reserve areas. And so these are essentially identifying these urban areas as not, as exclusionary areas. And yes, in fact, Knott is on the edge of that because Knott is in the city of Bend. Actually, the landfill is in the city, right? Or it's not, it must be right on the edge, right up there. So, okay, yeah. So then we'll bring in the airport buffers. And I really want to point this out. It was interesting when we were first looking at potential locations, and just from the standpoint, and this is a long time ago, and this was just from the standpoint of where does the county own a lot of land, and so and Tim or Chad, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember that it was, oh yeah, there's a lot of land that the county owns up by the airport, up by Redmond. And so it's all within the buffer, and so it's too close to the airport. But that just happens to be where the county owns a fair amount of land up there. And in fact, the Negus transfer station, I believe, is on part of that land up there.
One quick note, there's also a private airport in Sun River. And is the reason that's not shown as an airport buffer, is that because of the surrounded by national forest on the other side of the river?
Actually, I'm glad you pointed that out. That is an oversight because we did want to retain that one and we'll get that on there as again, because that actually is a public access airport. It's paved. There are some in the county that were showing up that were essentially grass fields. I'm not even sure if they had a windsock at them. You know, because they were quite rough.
Yeah, the airport in Sun River has gone through a lot of upgrades recently, so it's I mean, can't land commercial jets, but there's a lot of activity.
Yeah, and so it would at least be a, you know, a small general aviation field.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And then to wetlands. So as you can see, those wetlands are, you know, and what's nice about this, I can kind of turn them on and off. And you can see that there's not a lot. There's a few out here, east part of the county that are identified. And otherwise not a lot. And these are ones that show up, like I say, on the National Wetland Inventory, which is a pretty high level evaluation of wetlands. It's always what you go to first, because if nothing else, you have to say if your site doesn't have wetlands, you need to say why, but then also just because it is at least a first blush look at where they're at and where they could be near a site.
So one more note, there's a bunch of wetlands around Sun River as well. So maybe that's something that was an oversight also.
Yeah.
I would make sure to do that also.
Yeah, and I think that might be kind of falling in underneath the Sun River area there, that blocked out area.
Oh, okay,
I'll see. Yeah.
sure.
You can turn it off.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's not there. Okay.
Yeah.
Keith, do you know if those are on the federal wetland inventory?
They are, they should be, yes. I know we
I
do.
would think so.
Yep.
The same with South County, like Lupine has quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it just hard to see at the scale?
No, South County would really.
Yeah, I think South County would show up really well. That's true. Yeah.
That's why I believe at certain levels, layers don't show up, it's a visibility range.
Yeah,
So
and there may be some that because of the Forest Service overlay on some of that, it might be. But we'll take a look, and because we really do want to show them on here, and we'll make sure those get in there. So the 100-year floodplain, and now this is probably where we're identifying some of those areas that are off limits around Sun River. But this does actually pull in a fair amount along the rivers. Streams is another area that is a fatal flaw. It's like 200 feet away from streams. The reason why we didn't do that as a blanket overlay is because some of them are ephemeral dry streams. And so we need to look at those more at a granular level down at the parcel. But that is an area that we will be looking at a little bit more. And we felt that especially the larger waters were being picked up by the floodplain. So the sage-grouse core habitat, as you can see, is fairly significant to the east. And it takes up a lot of this area here, and then, you know, outside the county as well.
Can you turn that one on and off again?
So, yeah.
And Dwight, is that the highest level? You talked about the 3 different levels for.
Yes,
That's
yeah, so
only the
that
highest
is
level.
the core habitat. And so when you, in fact, I might have the other levels. I'll go through this and then we'll kind of go look at some of the other layers that we have. And you can kind of see how that. And the Metolius up here in the northwest. And the Holocene fault buffers. And so the primary area for Holocene faults are here to the west of Bend and to the south of Bend. And then steep slopes. So steep slopes is a pretty significant issue, obviously. At the same time, this is an area that we do have to look at fairly closely at the parcel level, just because, especially if you're in an area where you have a fair grade break, you know, you might have half your property that's fairly flat, and then it goes up a slope. You don't want to throw that whole parcel out in that case, and that could be fairly significant with some of the large parcels that are, particularly the larger parcels in the county that tend to be out to the east. So at this point, this is kind of what we see as the countywide exclusionary areas. The point, and I come back to this often to reemphasize this, and it's not to say that these are the only fatal flaws. It is to say that these are kind of what we can map out at the countywide level, and that the others we will identify at the parcel level. And, you know, if a site has a fatal flaw, it'll be knocked out at that point when we do that level of evaluation. So I'll identify a couple more here, just so you kind of get a feel. So this is kind of interesting because I'll have to go back and see exactly. I actually thought we had all NWI or some National Wetland Inventory parcel on there. Obviously, we didn't. This picked up those ones down by Sun River and down by Lapine and also this shows much more, and then especially out in the west part of the county, those areas. And then I'll just kind of show you the other areas for sage grouse. So these are the non-core areas, but you know, there are areas that you can develop, but you possibly need to mitigate. It's very much at a parcel level. I'm going to keep those these wetlands on there. Have those to look at. Trying to remember if there's we have. So this kind of identifies a few more of the airports out there. So not really that significant. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. No. So questions, other things you'd like to look at? You know, going back to kind of where we're heading next is, so we have this map showing kind of the excluded areas. Generally speaking, not wanting to pick up federal or look very seriously at federal properties, which knocks out a fair amount of space for BLM as well as Forest Service lands. And that is not to say that they wouldn't necessarily be good sites. It's just, it is very hard to acquire federal properties in a timely manner. I've been on sites where we've been trying to pick up just like little buffer areas along the side of landfills, and it's taken over 10 years. And this is with BLM lands in eastern Washington and Idaho. So it's a pretty difficult situation. I think, as Chad has noted in the past, it takes an act of Congress to do that. So we were tasked to revisit with the BLM on sites that are on their disposal list, and just clarify, disposal is not landfill disposal, sites that they've identified that they would not have any hurt feelings or passing on ownership to. And it took a lot of time to get that information from them, and I just finally got some documentation from them last week and forwarded on to parametrics for a little bit of digestion and analysis. My first blush impression is that it's not going to be a simple process, even though they're on the
disposal site list. There's a lot of requirements we're gonna have to meet to be able to get consideration from the BLM on that, but Parametrics is taking a look at that. We'll follow up with that probably at the next meeting.
Yep. And a good point to be made out of that, and we've noted it in the past, is that those lands can be very good as a neighbor. And so BLM lands, because, you know, they are under control of the federal government, they're not going to be developed for other purposes, for the same reason you're not going to easily develop them as a landfill. They do provide for good, you know, kind of public land buffers around a facility. As well as if there is one that's on the surplus list or disposal list that over time could be acquired, that identifying that next to a parcel that you're looking at would be an upside, because again, it's not going to be developed as residential or something like that. Those properties, they are typically surplused out to other public agencies, and so it's not like they're going off to the, you know, to a private developer or something.
Tim, I don't know if you can reflect on when you and Tom Anderson met with BLM, they had indicated that they would be receptive to kind of preserving adjacent properties, if we were to site landfill near them.
Right. And so far as to say that they would impose restrictions on their parcel internally to prevent some sort of development there. You know, so they would actively protect our buffer zone if it included their property.
Question about the wildlife zoning. My understanding is the county was gonna go through a process of updating some of that recently, but put it on pause until next year sometime. So I guess, I mean, my understanding of, I'm just trying to bring up what I think could be an environmental community concern. To what extent are the maps you're gonna use up here consistent with kind of more current up-to-date knowledge and thinking about where those buffers should be? I think most of the stuff I'm aware of is sort of winter mule deer habitat, elk habitat in and around Bend on the west and to the south and even southeast some. But that just seemed like it's a potential area of conflict if there isn't, or disagreement if we're not proactive about saying, well, where might these be going? Even though we haven't made that decision, because we don't, you know, identify those areas potentially sooner rather than later. But I wouldn't imagine we're going to be putting this thing real close to Bend either. So, but it'd be just good to find out from like ODFW and even some of the environmental groups, like where are you concerned about? So starting to think about it.
Yeah, exactly. And we do plan on doing that. And again, that's kind of one of those things at a kind of parcel level, especially with the nuances of where it might go, you know, with the new work. So these are different winter ranges and the like. A lot of those do allow for mitigation.
Can you turn it on and off again? real quick?
Yeah. So when we first identified them, we kind of made it clear that they weren't so much exclusionary areas, but areas that we needed to identify and potentially mitigate, depending on, you know, where the site was. And honestly, this is one of the reasons why there is a desire to look at disturbed properties or other impacted properties, because you know, typically they're already disturbed, they might be heavily fenced, or for whatever reason, you know, you're already able to if anything, you might help the situation by being able to provide better buffers around it that are accessible for wildlife and the like. So, and then just have your primary area, you know, being in that disturbed part of those parcels. So that's one reason why, you know, when we were looking at, when we go forward looking at the next steps, to look at such as surface mining areas. Because those are, you know, while they are resource lands and they're identified as that, and it would require a rezone or a zoning back to original zoning, they are, you know, they're already disturbed. And particularly if the resource has already been removed, they, in many cases, they're in need of a quote unquote reclamation. And so can be part of the reclamation for those properties.
I've got a comment here. This is Commissioner DeBonne.
Mhm.
So for that the mule deer routes and overlay area, as you study it, the state is the professional there. The state's analysis is the proposed footprint for that migration area. So it isn't debatable about, well, what's the migration area include? It's already published by the state of Oregon's Department of Fish and Wildlife. So I'm just letting you know, when we talk about it for land use in Deschutes County, it's basically taking that proposed map or published map by the state and then talking about, how it does affect private property. So it could be a layer here is what I'm saying. It's an ODF and W migration map already published, is my understanding.
Okay.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director. Just on the wildlife inventory piece, I think it's worth acknowledging that as Commissioner DeBonne stated, a landfill today is not recognized as a conflicting use in any of the wildlife areas. It's a use subject to conditional use under the exclusive farm use zone. All things being equal, to the extent that the Community Development Department is directed to update the wildlife inventory for mule deer starting next winter, I don't anticipate, certainly staff is not recommending that, nor is ODF and W recommending as part of that inventory update that a solid waste facility be seen as a conflicting use. To what extent mitigation outside of local processes is required, I don't know the answer to that, but I think from our zoning standpoint, as it stands today, and as I understand it going forward tomorrow, the zoning pertaining to wildlife should not be a hindrance. I will, one other comment just very quickly, as you contemplate potentially surface mine sites that could be viable, you'll want to, right now, my understanding is surface mining sites don't recognize landfills. They have to be rezoned. And then the question is, what do you rezone it to? And again, to my knowledge, the only rural zoning that allows a solid waste facility is in the exclusive farm use zone, which then begs the question, how difficult would it be conceptually to, you're taking a surface mining site and then you're justifying it as EFU? That may be difficult to justify, again, because you may not have agricultural soils because of the surface mining activity. So that may be a quirk that needs some noodling to figure out how to rectify if you find yourself again with a viable surface mining property.
So I know another situation that's come up, or a question that's been asked around that, is the ability to I don't know exactly how you stated, but it's to rewrite that zoning code for surface mine so that if it is a worked out mining site, can it be used for a landfill? So essentially that is part of the final use of that property.
Yeah, fair enough. If to what I think you're acknowledging is it may be worth exploring with the board's support a legislative amendment that recognizes that surface mining zones or surface mining zone properties that have exhausted their resources or whatever factors warrant it should be allowed to accommodate a landfill site. So I think there's a route there's certainly a route to do that. It'll take some coordination, but something that I think can be undertaken. And I dare say it won't be easy, but nothing is, as we're experiencing just in this conversation. But I think there's a path there that we could certainly explore and execute if that's where this group and the board ultimately finds is the most suitable location.
And Peter, I just want to clarify just for the group's benefit, because you and I are more familiar with this, but when you say that a landfill is not a conflicting use in the wildlife zone, that's the wildlife zone. That's not the sage grouse core area. The sage grouse is wildlife, but sage grouse has a different set of rules than the other map.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. The sage grouse is in a different, when I think of wildlife, there's the wildlife combining zone. And then we have a separate wildlife area that's recognized as the sage grouse combining zone. In that area, and this is all directed by the state of Oregon, that regulatory construct does not single out conflicting uses and by listing them. It looks at impacts that any use that has a certain level of intensity has to go through the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife's mitigation program, which is complicated, can be very expensive, and lead to significant uncertainty. So that's I think this group is wise to consider not exploring a landfill in the sage grouse area for those factors.
Peter, is that comment directed at the core area or the other two levels of sage grouse habitat?
It's focused primarily on the core and the low density. In the general habitat area, as long as I recall, as long as you're away a few miles away from any documented lek, I don't believe you're subject to the mitigation rules. But from my interactions with ODF&W and Ron Robinson and some of the challenges that he's having with the Spencer Wells mine site, you really want to stay away from those those two subsets, core and low density, because the state puts a premium on mitigation.
Yeah, in ours, we give the low level of a significantly lower score, not a fatal flaw. The fatal flaw is only for the core, but that's a point well taken. I mean, just what the process that it would take and the mitigation and so forth that would be required.
Yeah, and one final comment. Thanks for indulging me. I'm not aware of any local government in the in the 8 affected counties that have sage grouse of any large scale development project successfully going through the mitigation program for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Which speaks volumes about how imperfect and how unpredictable this program is for many counties like ours that need this type of site for a growing population. So ODF&W doesn't have a workable template that one can draw upon to understand the mitigation hierarchy and how it's applied and what the compensation that they would be requesting and any other conditions that they might put on a project of this magnitude. So it really is unknown about how this agency will apply the rules that are promulgated in our code but are coming out straight out of state law. So it's unfortunately, we just don't have a working framework to understand how they would apply these rules to a landfill site.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear all of that, because I mean, where we're at right now, I mean, with this here, we can take the wildlife out here just real quick. I mean, it's fairly limited. I mean, when you look at it, as far as the areas, little areas here to the east, a little closer in. But you're starting to get into rural residential out here too. It's not, I mean, it's not exactly rural residential, but that's essentially what it is, because there's enough people out there that you're also getting into high value farmland in a lot of those areas. So that's precluding it. So
Central Oregon Irrigation District owns some big pieces, 20.
They do off of Dodge Road also.
Yeah, they won't sell those.
yeah,
Yeah, it can't be, they won't be houses there.
yeah.
That's, I mean, I farm right next door to a 1,000-acre piece.
Oh, okay.
That they own.
When you say that they won't sell, have people approach them, or do you approach them and they say?
Yeah, I looked at doing it to expand into farming, and they just weren't interested in having that done. They said they were gonna save it for some public matter or some future thing, so it might be something.
Oh, okay, okay.
Might work.
Yeah, okay.
They were not interested in selling it to a private individual, I can tell you that.
Won't sell it to Luke, I might sell it to Chad.
That might work. Yeah, see, there's mine. That's 1,000 acres.
Yeah, so as I noted, the next step is to start applying kind of the rest of the criteria. Using GIS initially, particularly with the parcels, the number of parcels that we need to pull together. We don't want to come up with a site that's, 105 acre parcels. It's, what we're really kind of focusing on at this point, on this first screening, is up to about five parcels. And this is just to do a initial GIS screening. So 5 parcels, the smallest parcel being about 50 acres, just because that's something that we can fairly easily model with the GIS program. And then to see what we come up with as far as 250 acre parcels and above. That's the bare minimum, is the 250 acres. But if it's next to BLM land, or it's next to other federal lands or other public lands that would provide some buffer, that's doable with a smaller size.
This is Shad Campbell with Deschutes County IT and GIS. I had a quick question about the airport buffer. What was the buffer distance?
So it is 10,000 feet from jet aircraft airports. So that is primarily Bend and Redmond, and then 5,000 feet from other public access airports.
Gotcha.
From the end of the runway, around the runway, to the other end of the runway. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's why they're shaped the way they're shaped.
Thank you.
Oh, those are the map. I already texted Sue earlier.
Oh, okay.
Okay, those
Okay.
okay for sure.
I'm gonna stop sharing this and go back. Unless, is there anything else anybody wants to see on these? We can turn things on and off, all that. This is the time we can play with that stuff too.
Right, one layer that I thought was interesting to see was ownership.
Oh, yeah.
There's public land, it shows county and federal land differently.
And so this is, as I understand, this is all public lands. So that's federal, state, and local. And so, yeah, a good chunk of the county is some type of public land or another.
What is that layer?
So this is zoning, I'm not sure if we have a identified as far as which, I'll bet you on it. We have a lot of different, you can see both local as well as county, so it's a lot of stuff on here. And obviously, the only ones we really need are the county zoning. And so I will kind of get that, work that out. Because we're already knocked out all the urban areas. Let's be able to check that. Oh, okay, all right, thanks, Keith. Yeah, thanks later.
Thanks for a great meeting so far, and we'll see you next month.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Drop out of that. And so we essentially went through all of these countywide exclusionary areas, went through the mapping. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the communications plan, and then kind of a next steps that we have. For thanks, Nick. Going into the site identification and the broad site screening. And so you will, and actually I'll let Susanna hit this first, and then we'll kind of jump into that next.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Susanna Joelber. I'm with Barney and Worth, and we're part of the parametrics team. We've been working on the communications for the project. So I don't know if anyone went to the county fair. Did anyone see the county booth there with the prize wheel? We had a trivia kind of thing where you could get candy if you know, there was no right or wrong answer. But anyway, it was just to attract people to the booth, and apparently it was a pretty busy booth, just to talk about the process and the siting process and the not landfill, and talk about the good stuff that the county's doing as far as recycling and just garner interest in it. So I think it was visited by a lot of people from what I heard. So
nobody wants to admit how you did on that.
There were a lot of fun facts, and we had a kids version too. So anyway, but anywhere you have candy is a good thing, I think. So anyway, so we're just trying to target some of those upcoming events to try and talk about the siting process and get the word out there that this is kind of ongoing, and we've been working on it. And until now, there hasn't really been a map with sites or blobs or anything. And so it's been a little bit obtuse, but we kind of expect there's going to be momentum and more interest as the process goes on and as the sites are narrowed. So we've got some upcoming events. Chad is going to be talking about the process at County College, which is coming up, and then State of the County. And then I think we're going to be at City Club after the first of the year. They're talking about that this week, I think, at their scheduling meeting. And basically, as we move along with the siting process, we're going to focus in on the key SWAC meetings. So it was hard to see the schedule up at the first couple slides, but basically in September, you're going to see that narrowed list of sites that's coming from the work that Dwight and his team has been doing with the exclusionary criteria and the areas of the county that are left over. And then after that, in December, hopefully down to a list of, Dwight, it's like 12 to 15 sites once the broad area screening is complete. And then from there, in March of next year, we'll be down to 3 to 5 finalist sites. So as that kind of is narrowed into a funnel, the interest we expect is going to gain momentum. And so after the first of the year, we'll probably be starting with the county's communications team, more email blasts, e-newsletters, things like that, more targeted outreach, talking about the process and how people can get involved and weigh in. We're planning an open house after your March SWAC meeting, just to tell folks about the sites. And at the same time, I think we're going to be doing a story map. The county's been using that for other public processes, and it kind of is a nice way to tell a story about what's been going on and have people kind of be able to interact with maps and things like that. So that's about it. Did I miss?
No, I think that's it. So the next big SWAC meetings really are the September meeting with the identified sites, initial sites, and then kind of leading into the broad site screening. And then the December, I mean, everybody wants a big meeting in December, you know? And so we have the essentially the outcome of that broad site screening at that meeting. And so that will be, it'll be a lot of work that will be presented at that time. And, you know, probably knocking down the number of sites that go forward down to about a dozen or so. And then that will then set the stage for at least the kind of the initial screening at the focus level down to the short list that we get to in March that will be presented at the March meeting.
Is there an explicit plan, like, to differentiate between how we're gonna engage, like, and communicate with the public versus like other electeds versus like maybe environmental groups? Are there like different opportunities for those organizations to engage, or is it kind of all in one open house?
No, that's a good question. Yeah, our intent kind of, while the team's doing this broad area screening, is to do more presentations. So yeah, to the Central Oregon Environmental Network.
Talking more after the meeting about getting possibly on a future agenda.
Yeah. So if you have a group that you think would be good, actually to all the SWAC members, if you have kind of an interest group that you work with, or you think that would be good for Chad and Tim to come and talk about the process, that would be great. We can schedule that and stuff.
Yeah, I can send over some recommendations.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Cool.
Yeah, we want to have as much outreach as possible. So, you know, it's really important to get the public and get folks, you know, really weighing in on the process as well as the sites once we get out to that point.
Certainly, as we generate this map with potential sites that the interest in Momentum is going to build, we want to be able to reach out and hear from as many people as we can and as many groups as we can.
We have a chat.
Chat here. Can you share about the communication with tribes and communities of color? I know environmental justice considerations were emphasized in an early meeting. We have not heard back from Whitney with county administration. She was working on trying to get a contact with the tribes, and I'll follow up with her and see if she's having progress on this. It's been challenging to try to find people to reach out to. Udara, for anyone else has contacts, it would be helpful to share that with us as well.
Yeah, I have terrible eyesight, but I saw communities of color and marginalized groups, I think, up in the chat. So that is a group we could definitely touch base with. The Black Leaders Assembly, Central Oregon, Latino Association, groups like that. So we can definitely do outreach to them in the fall, to more targeted outreach. So yeah.
Yeah, and any contacts people have with organizations out there to make sure that we're as inclusive as possible would be great. So as we noted, you know, update, so kind of what's next. So updating the project website, you know, and actually we've already created FAQs. It's to kind of build on those. And then we actually are building on those a fair amount and kind of coming up with new material, because as we go farther into this, even more items to note in that. And then developing the project fact sheets. We had fact sheets for the fair. and that we had there. And so those will continue to be updated as we kind of expand into the rest of the project. And then, as I noted, we will be doing the initial site identification here in the next month. And we'll be back to visit with you all on, I think, the 20th of September to go through that. And then that will really set the stage for our broadside screening, which is what we'll do, for about the 3 months after that, and then come back to the group in December.
So the big meeting, I guess, the open house, where you say 5 sites, maybe 3 to 5 sites.
Down to
Yeah,
3 to 5.
Yeah, it's at the initial focus screening. And then before we do the in-depth, field investigations and all that.
That was my question.
Yeah.
That date in spring of 23 will be the kickoff for actually going in the field and drilling holes.
It is, yep, yep. So we get kind of get everybody's input and into that, both the process, into those sites, into other things that people want to see as part of that. Yeah.
And I mean, as we narrow down and we're kind of aware of those 3 to 5 sites, I think we'd be doing targeted outreach to the neighbors of the adjacent property owners and folks in the area, and if there's any special interest groups that are concerned about sites.
Oh, boy.
Yep.
That's when it's gonna get interesting.
Yeah, that's when it gets exciting. Yeah. And so, just in case it didn't work for me to go in on that GIS, I had a backup slide. So
yeah.
these are what are going to be in the packet. Because we needed to have something we could actually drop into a packet. And so these will be in a PDF as part of the minutes for the meeting. And they're just screenshots off of what we just went through. But we will go through and pick up some of those things, particularly the NWI wetlands and the airport. Those ones that we didn't quite get in there, like the Sun River Airport. So that's pretty much it. Questions, thoughts?
Do you have any, you don't have weather in there. There's part of this area that in the winter would be pretty tricky to operate in. Further east you go, the less snow you might
Yeah,
get.
the annual snowfall.
Yeah, there was.
Yeah, it was not, I mean, it wasn't a county-wide screening item because it's not a fatal flaw, but it is scored on because, with precipitation and, snowfall and things like that. I don't think we don't call out snowfall directly, but it's under the precipitation. So higher precipitation also around here also means more snow and, and issues that you have to deal with. Yeah.
So Jared, the precipitation, definitely there are some environmental issues with that related to leaching generation on the land. I can't tell you from an operational standpoint, when there's a big snowfall event, the best roads right on land, we have lots of big equipment that move a lot. So from an operation standpoint, snow is not as big a challenge for.
Collection might be.
Yeah. Well, the location of the landfill doesn't necessarily impact collection. Definitely it impacts the transportation side of it, though. And depending on where we are, we would be relying on ODOT or somebody to keep the roads clear. But weather is a factor that I think we get down to on the specific site level analysis.
Yeah, and I'll show you what we have.
Yeah, average precipitation.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so in this case, we just kind of show the contour, so to speak, of it. And, definitely, obviously, moisture to the west, and then gets really dry to the.
What if you found a spot that bordered county boundary And if you had a little bit more across the border, it would be useful to have. Can you go outside the county a little bit?
I'll turn to the county.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would expect we would prefer to have the landfill proper on Deschutes County, land within Deschutes County, but possibly similar to the philosophy with the BLM, buffer on adjacent out of county land might be a possibility. That's a good question. We've never considered, we had spoken with Crook County during the solid waste management plan about accepting waste from Deschutes County. They made it pretty clear they did not want all that. They want to preserve their capacity. But I don't know, based on your lifetime experience, Tim, it seems like we would want to keep the facility itself within the county.
I'm not, I don't recall that being a big issue the last time we did this. And there was a point in time when Crook County actually was paying a holding fee on a piece of property out there that they were gonna have their landfill there. And they were hoping that our landfill would go there, we would combine. So it was in Crook County, but it was over the county.
Straddle the border.
And so I wouldn't say that that's absolutely not possible that we'd be across the county line, but just in terms to get there, it's gonna be, it's all, how far is it to get there, so there might be a good spot there, but if there's a better spot or as good a spot that's 10 or 15 miles closer to Bend, well, that's what we wanna do. So just kind of gets out there a little bit far.
Yeah, and I think that would typically be the situation, although, back to what Chad said, particularly if there's federal land or other public land of some type that's on that other side of the county line, that would be great. I mean, and it would again be a good site just from the standpoint of kind of providing additional buffer. Other questions, thoughts?
Okay, well, I guess we'll adjourn the meeting. I want to thank everyone for coming and participating. All those online, thank you very much, as well as was at 10 live here.
Can you, the date and time for the next meeting? Confirm.
On the sheet.
Is it the next one or the 20th?
It's the 20th.
Yeah, so we're doing them on the third Tuesday of the month. It's just the schedule we're trying to stick to it. So thank you. Yeah, so next meeting will be here on September 20th.
And then there wouldn't be one in October, November, just December.
Depends on what
We'll
kind of
see.
drives things at the September meeting. Yeah. Subsequently, so we skipped the July meeting. We didn't have a lot going on. We were waiting for the board to approve the criteria. But we may be holding multiple meetings as momentum and publicity gets out on the project for it.
My guess is that probably not October, because we're just gonna be getting into that broadside screening and I don't think we'd have a lot at that point, but maybe November.
Maybe if folks can make sure they signed in before on their way out, that'd be great. I think it helps Sue with the minutes.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
As soon as we're ready to turn off my